All right, let's dive into the absolutely wild and maybe a little bit dark world of an ant colony. It turns out their survival sometimes requires a pretty extreme sacrifice.
So let's just get right to it with this bombshell of a question. In a society that's all about cooperation, why on earth would ants kill their own young? I mean, that sounds completely backwards, right? But as you're about to see, there's a very cold, very deliberate logic behind this.
And here is the first mind-blowing twist. This isn't some kind of brutal attack or a way to get rid of the weak. The worker ants are actually just responding to a direct order. The sick, young ants, they're literally begging to be killed.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we first need to understand the world these ants are living in. And their biggest threat isn't some predator lurking outside the nest. No, the real enemy is an invisible one that strikes from within.
The concept you absolutely have to get is this idea of the superorganism. You got to think of an ant colony less like a city full of individuals and more like one single body. The colony is the organism, and the health and survival of that whole body is way, way more important than any single part. And the biggest danger to that body? Disease. As lead researcher Erica Dawson puts it, these crowded nests are, quote, a perfect place for a disease outbreak to occur. You've got thousands of them crawling all over each other. One sick ant could easily trigger an epidemic that wipes out the entire colony.
So, how do they deal with this constant threat? Well, adult worker ants have a pretty straightforward strategy. It's basically the ultimate form of social distancing. If they get sick, they just leave the nest and go off to die alone. Simple. But the young pupae, they're helpless. They're trapped inside their cocoons and can't go anywhere, so they need a totally different solution.
So, how in the world did scientists figure all this out? This is where the story gets really cool. It turns into a fantastic piece of scientific detective work.
The team over at the Institute of Science and Technology Austria had one huge question. Was this whole process just a passive thing, or were the pupae sending out an active intentional signal? Were they, in effect, calling out, "Hey, I'm sick over here, come and kill me"? To figure this out, they designed a really clever experiment. First, they managed to isolate the specific chemical smell that was being produced by the sick pupae. Then, they took this death scent and just dabbed it onto perfectly healthy pupae. The result? It was immediate. The worker ants swarmed and destroyed the healthy pupae that simply smelled sick. But here's the real kicker, the part that proves this is totally intentional. Researchers noticed that the sick pupae only start producing this chemical signal when other worker ants are nearby. It's not just a constant symptom of being sick, it's a message they choose to send, and they wait until there's an audience ready to receive it.
So, what does this destruction actually look like? It's pretty grim, but it's also incredibly efficient. The workers gather around, they tear away the cocoon, bite holes into the pupa, and inject a poison. And here's the crucial part. This poison does two jobs at once. It kills the pupa, sure, but it also disinfects everything, killing the pathogen and stopping the disease dead in its tracks.
Okay, so we've got the how. Now let's get into the why. Because this behavior is just a stunning example of the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good. This is what biologists call altruistic self-sacrifice. It's when an individual does something that reduces its own chance of survival, in this case down to zero, but by doing so, it dramatically increases the survival odds for everyone else in the group.
But here's the beautiful paradox of evolution. While it looks completely selfless, it's also, in a weird way, in the pupa's own genetic interest. By making sure the colony survives, and most importantly, that the queen survives, they're ensuring that their shared family genes get passed on to the next generation.
And in an ant colony, those genes are incredibly closely shared. Because of their unique genetics, sisters in a colony can share more than 99% of their DNA. They're actually more closely related to each other than a human parent is to their own child. So by dying, a sick pupa is basically ensuring that tons of copies of its own genes, carried by its sisters, will live on. So this entire brutal system is designed to protect the genetic legacy of the colony. But, and there's always a but, it turns out not everyone has to play by these rules. Let's talk about the queen's royal exception. This is exactly what the scientists wondered. I mean, if this sacrifice is so critical for the colony, why wouldn't the most important member of all, the queen, have to participate? Are the queens somehow cheating?
Well, when the researchers infected both worker and queen pupae, they found a huge difference.
The worker pupae, with their weaker immune systems, pretty quickly started sending out that death signal. But the queen pupae, they're built different. They have much stronger immune systems. They didn't signal at all. They just fought off the infection and survived.
So it's not cheating, it's just a better defense. Evolutionarily, it makes sense. A future queen is just far too valuable to be sacrificed. It's a better investment for the colony to equip her with a superior immune system and reserve that drastic measure of self-sacrifice for the more, well, expendable workers.
Okay, so this is all really fascinating stuff about ants, but let's zoom out. What's the big takeaway here? And what could this possibly tell us about ourselves?
The connection is surprisingly direct. This behavior we're seeing in ants is basically a large-scale version of something that happens inside our own bodies every single day. When one of our cells gets infected or becomes cancerous, it sends out its own chemical signals, a find me and eat me signal that tells our immune system to come and destroy it for the good of the whole body.
And this all boils down to a really powerful concept: social immunity. Whether you're talking about an ant in a colony or a cell in a body, the principle is exactly the same. You protect the group by having a system in place where the individual can make the ultimate sacrifice when it becomes a threat to the whole.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question that science hasn't answered yet. We know that queens don't signal for death when they think they can fight off an infection. But what about when they can't? When faced with a terminal illness she knows she can't beat, will a queen ever make that call and choose to sacrifice herself for her colony? It's a fantastic question, and one we'll have to wait for future science to answer.